Hey everyone, welcome back. So we're going to be finishing up with our power-ups in this tutorial. So we've already set up the invincibility and the guns, and now all that's left to do is the laser power-up. And this one will be a little bit different to our other guns. We're going to be using some totally new functions and types of collision, and we're going to set up that new object. So let's go ahead, create a new object. Rename that, we're going to call it obj laser. I'm actually not going to set a sprite for this one. We're going to be drawing it using some of the drawing shape blocks. So let's head over to the draw event. And if you just type in draw, you can see all of the different draw functions. So we've got options to draw circles, rectangles, and lines, and that's what we want for the laser. So let's just drag that in. And as you can see, a line, of course, is just going to be determined by 2 points, and it will draw a line between those 2 points. So if you think about it, when we shoot a laser, the first point will just be wherever the creator of the laser is, and then the second point will kind of be along the direction vector of the creator, along that by a certain length. So like I said, we do want this X and Y to be moving with its creator, so it's going to need a reference to its creator object, and it's going to want to be setting its X and Y variable to its creator's X and Y. So we haven't set this up yet. It doesn't know who its creator is. This is a made-up variable that we will have to set later on, but we'll assume that we'll set that up later. So cool, now the first spot is correct. Another thing that we might have to set up to get the second spot, we're actually going to be using those vector functions that we used last time, the length, direction, X and Y. So we do need a direction, and that direction is also going to be determined by its creator. So let's set direction to its creator's. We could put direction, but I think actually we were determining where the objects were facing by their image angle. So we'll set it to that. Now you can put stuff like this in the draw event because the draw event is updated every frame, just like the step event. But just to separate all of the drawing code, because we're going to put a lot more in here, from the variable updates, I'm going to just cut that out and put it in the step event. And it is important to know that the step event runs before the draw event, so this will update before the draw event starts, so we'll be in the correct position. Alright, so now we are going to be calculating that second point. And that point is going to be relative to where we currently are, and then off by a certain length direction and Y direction. And remember, those functions give us the kind of X and Y components of a vector. So if, for example, the player is here and we've gone off on a 45-degree angle, and maybe with a length of 500, this function is going to tell us how far over in the X direction that is, and then the Y one is going to tell us how far over in the Y direction. So now we just have to put in those arguments, and I will just set a temporary variable for the length so that I can use the same one. And I'll set 500 just so the laser is quite big, and we can use that in here. And we know our direction because we just set it in the step event. There we go. So that should be calculating the second point for the line. Now that will kind of be setting up the drawing, but it's not going to collide with anything on its own. So we can't use the default collision event because this doesn't have a sprite and it doesn't have a collision mask. We kind of have to set that up for ourselves because we're drawing it this way using this action block. And the block now that we're going to use a different kind of collision. So we can just type in collision and see what's here. And the one we want is collision shape. So this will allow us to check for a collision in a certain shape. So as you can see, you can do it in a line, in a rectangle, or a ellipse. We want line, of course, and as you can see, these are actually all going to be the same arguments as this one right here, so we could just copy paste them over. I might declare them as temporary variables, just so we're not performing this function 2 times. There we go. And now, what are we colliding with? I can't just put an enemy because we don't know at the moment what faction we're part of. We don't want to be explicit. So to keep it general, we're going to have to put the OBJ faction kind of parent. So this will include all members of the factions. Now, this argument here is basically saying if OBJ laser was part of OBJ faction, do we want to exclude ourselves from this collision check? This isn't something we have to worry about because OBJ laser is not part of the OBJ faction kind of class. It's completely separate, so it doesn't actually matter what we put here. It's never going to happen. As for this one, this would be checking if this is not the case, but we do want to check if we're colliding with something. And now we have an option to return a list. So what this does, it doesn't just return one object. So normally functions like this might give you the ID of the object it is colliding with, but this will actually give us a list of objects if it's colliding with multiple objects. So if we fire the laser at like 5 asteroids, it's going to give us the opportunity to interact with all of them at once and destroy all of them. So we do want to do that. I'm going to tick that. And then this one right here, we should also tick in this case, because a list is actually a data structure and we haven't dealt with data structures before, and I don't want to go too much into it, but just be aware that data structures are a bit different to other variables and they have to be destroyed in a different way. Usually when you are messing around with action blocks and you're interacting with data structures, it's going to have that built in, so you don't really have to worry about it. Just remember to have this ticked that we do want to free the target, which is basically wherever we're saving the list. And I might call this collision list. So remember that's going to hold a list of objects that it's collided with, if it has collided with any at all. We want to tick temporary, again, because we don't need this to stick around. So now this is kind of saying if we've collided with anything at all, we can proceed and do some other calculations. So like I said, because this isn't necessarily just one object, we're actually going to have to iterate through the list and check all of them to see if they're part of our faction, and if they're not part of our faction, we want to destroy them. So to do that, we're going to use a for loop. And we do want to be using this I index kind of incrementer because we can use this to access different entries in the list. So starting at 0 for the first one, we can access all of them. The only problem is that we need to know how many times we're going to loop. So how many times do we need to do it? Well, we're not sure yet. We haven't actually gotten the length of the list. We don't know how many entries there are in it. So we need to do that. We need to get the list item count. This one right here. So this will get the length of the list. So we have to put in the name of the list right here. And then it will save it as, let's just save it as count. So now we can put that in here and it will loop as many times as the number of items or the number of IDs in the list, because that's what's actually being stored in the list. It's the IDs of the objects we've collided with. So now that we're looping through them, we can access them by kind of opening up the list and getting the entry at a certain index. And remember, we were going to use the I as that index. We have to put in the name of the list here. So now it's going to give us whatever ID is at the index I. So starting at 0, 1, 2, however many objects it's collided with. Let's save that as inst for instance ID. And now we just have to check if that instance's faction is not equal to our own. So again, we haven't set this up yet because we haven't set up the passing over of all of the important variables to the laser, but we will in a moment. So if this is not the case, if it is not part of our faction, then we want it to destroy itself, or we want it to run its user event 0. So it's taking damage event. But of course, we do want to apply this to the instance. So make sure that we put instance here. So the instance performs this. And of course, we want to make it user event 1, not 0. That's the take damage one. All right, so one final thing. If you remember, what we'll do is basically we're going to be reusing the initialize bullet script for the laser. So all of these will be passed on. So it's going to know its faction, its image blend, its creator, its direction. All of these variables will be passed on. So knowing this, we can also set up the laser to be a certain color. So let's just head back to the laser, because at the moment, when you use one of these functions, it doesn't draw it at the image blend of the object itself. Remember, this isn't a sprite. It's not going to be drawing anything with that aqua image blend. To do that, we have to change the draw color, kind of like how we did in the earlier tutorials when we were drawing strings of words. So we want to be doing that here. We don't want to select a certain font. We just want to use our image blend. All right, so that's basically most of the laser setup. The only thing that we need to add now is some way for the laser to get destroyed, because right now it's going to just stick around and keep moving with its creator. So we need to head over to its create event and set up an alarm. And you can set it to however long you want the laser to persist for. I might actually just keep it at 30 frames, so that's half a second that the laser will stay there for. So when this goes off, we just want it to destroy itself. All right, so that is our laser set up. Now we just need a way of creating it. So let's come over to the create bullet over here. And the only one that we haven't done yet is the laser one. So we can do that now. It's still going to look quite similar to all of these. In fact, we can just copy this over. We want to just change the audio finally. We're not going to use this app, we're going to use the laser. And we're not creating a bullet anymore, we're creating the laser. Now for this one thing that we have to change. We do want to set its direction, although it's kind of not necessary because the laser will be updating its own direction. But we do not want to set a speed. I actually don't want the laser to be changed from the default speed of 0 because it's setting its position to its creator's position. So we do just want to make sure that we're putting in 0 there. But you can see actually that that's all we need to change. All of this will still work. The initialize bullet script wasn't specific to the obj bullet object. And it will still pass all of these over to whatever object it's created. So all of those variables we were referencing, the faction, the image blend, the creator, that is exactly what we called them in the obj laser. So it will now be able to actually use all of those. All that's left to do now is just test the laser. So we can come over to the obj power up. We want to change this to 4 for the laser, and we are ready to test it. There we go. So we can fire the laser and it is blowing up all of our objects. Great. Now, you'll find that that laser is quite a powerful object. It's kind of just going to obliterate everything that it touches, even the brutes. As you can see, it just blows them up immediately. So to make things a little bit more interesting, because there's kind of no hope for the enemies at that point, I'm going to make the brutes immune to the laser. So they'll be the only enemies immune. But to do that, it's actually quite easy. All we have to do is come back to the faction object, and we're going to set up a new variable because I want all of the faction objects to have this variable because we're going to be checking it in the obj laser. Basically, we just want to check if the object is immune to us or not. So we're going to make a variable called immune to laser. So we can actually use a boolean for this, which is basically just a true false. And we want it to be false by default. We don't want things to be immune to the laser. Now, all of our objects will be inheriting this, and we just want to tweak it in the brute. So there we go. We just want to overwrite this one and set it to true. Now we just have to set up the check in the laser itself. So in here, in the collision, in addition to checking the faction, we also have to check that variable. So right here, we're going to check if immune to laser. Actually, we're checking if inst dot immune to laser. We want to check the instance. If it's not true, or I suppose you could just put if it's false, then we will do this. Right? So if we're not immune to the laser, if we're not part of the faction, then we will run our take damage event. So let's give that a test. So as you can see, it was immune to the laser. Alright, cool. So we're basically done. The only thing now we need to do is just spawn the power-ups instead of just having one test one in the room. So first of all, let's just come over and delete that. We don't need it anymore. We've tested them all and they're all working. And let's remove that overwrite of the random index pick because we do want it to be random now. And now we just want to be creating those lasers when, for example, the asteroids get destroyed. So let's come over to the asteroid. And we're going to add a destroy event because that's when we want to do it. So in here, we're going to create a power-up. Although I don't want to create it every time the asteroid gets created, I'm just going to tick relative to where it currently is. I want it to have a random chance, basically. So I'm going to get a random number. And maybe I'll use an integer and I'll just say, let's try and pick a number from 0 to 5. So that's kind of 6 options. And we'll save that in chance, a variable. And then we can check if chance is equal to any number, for example 0, then we will do this. So essentially this is a 1 in 6 chance to create a power-up. So I think that should be pretty good. So we're going to copy all of this and we're going to head over to the parent enemy. And now in the enemy's destroy event, we can just paste all of that in. Although I might just reduce the chance rate, which will actually make it more likely that we will spawn a power-up. So now it's a 1 in 2 chance because it's either 0 or 1. If chance is equal to 0, then it's going to make the power-up. So now we're ready to test all of that. So there we go. Alright, so all of our power-ups seem to be working. So that's it for the power-ups, we're done. Now we're going to move on to kind of the final stages of this little series. We're going to be sprucing up the visuals a bit. So in the next tutorial, we're going to add some screen shake to the game, and then we'll take a look at adding particle effects. So thanks for watching, I'll see you in the next tutorial.